In the vast galaxy of Star Wars, few weapons carry the weight of legend quite like the Darksaber. This isn't just another lightsaber with a different color crystal. This is a blade that has shaped the destiny of an entire warrior culture, sparked civil wars, and determined the fate of rulers across 1,000 years of galactic history. Picture this, a weapon so powerful that whoever wields it can claim dominion over all of Mandalore. A blade so cursed that some believe it brings nothing but destruction to those who dare to grasp it. A symbol so revered that Mandalorian warriors will fight to the death just for the right to hold it. This is the story of the Darksaber, and it's far more complex and fascinating than you might imagine. The legend begins over a millennium ago, around 1,050 years before the Battle of Yavin, in an era when the galaxy was very different from the one we know. The Old Republic was at its height, and the Jedi Order was welcoming beings from across the galaxy into their ranks. Among these new initiates was a Mandalorian named Tara Vizsla, who would make history as the first of his people ever to be inducted into the Sacred Order of the Jedi. Now, you have to understand how unprecedented this was. Mandalorians and Jedi had a complicated relationship, to put it mildly. The warrior culture of Mandalore and the peaceful philosophies of the Jedi didn't exactly mesh well together. But Tara Vizsla was different. He managed to bridge these two worlds, becoming both a respected Jedi and a proud Mandalorian. During his time with the Jedi, Tara Vizsla created something that had never been seen before and hasn't been seen since. Using his knowledge of both Mandalorian craftsmanship and Jedi techniques, he forged a lightsaber unlike any other. The blade itself was black as the void of space, shorter than a traditional lightsaber, and shaped more like an ancient sword than the elegant weapons of the Jedi. The hilt was crafted from Beskar, the legendary Mandalorian steel that could withstand even lightsaber strikes. This wasn't just a weapon, it was a masterpiece that represented the union of two great traditions. The Darksaber combined the technological prowess and warrior spirit of Mandalore with the mystical connection to the Force that defined the Jedi. When Tara Vizsla ignited this blade for the first time, he created more than just a lightsaber. He created a symbol that would define Mandalorian leadership for generations to come. But here's where the story takes a dramatic turn. When Tara Vizsla died, the Jedi did what they always did with the belongings of fallen members. They kept the Darksaber in their temple as a memorial to its creator. For the Mandalorians, this was unacceptable. The Darksaber wasn't just some relic to be displayed in a museum. It was their heritage, their birthright, and a symbol of their greatest hero. During the fall of the Old Republic, when chaos reigned across the galaxy and the Jedi were stretched thin defending countless worlds, members of House Vizsla saw their opportunity. In a daring raid that would be talked about for centuries, they infiltrated the Jedi Temple itself and stole back what they considered rightfully theirs. This wasn't just theft. This was a declaration that Mandalorian culture would not be diminished or controlled by outside forces, even ones as powerful as the Jedi. Once back in Mandalorian hands, the Darksaber became something even more powerful than Tara Vizsla had originally intended. House Vizsla used it as a rallying point, a symbol that could unite the fractious clans of Mandalore under a single banner. The black blade became synonymous with legitimate rule, and those who wielded it could command the respect and loyalty of warriors across the galaxy. But the Darksaber's power came with a price. Many Jedi died upon its blade as House Vizsla used it to carve out their domain and eliminate those who would stand in their way. The weapon that had been created by a Jedi became the instrument of Jedi destruction, an irony that would echo through the centuries. For generations, the Darksaber was passed down through House Vizsla, each wielder adding to its legend and its body count. The weapon helped them rule all of Mandalore for many years, establishing them as the preeminent power in Mandalorian space. But as the galaxy changed, so too did Mandalore. By the time of the Clone Wars, Mandalore had undergone a dramatic transformation. The old warrior ways had been largely abandoned in favor of pacifism under the leadership of Duchess Satine Kryze. The new Mandalorians, as they were called, sought to distance themselves from their violent past and build a peaceful society. But not everyone was willing to abandon the old ways. Pre-Vizsla, a descendant of the weapon's creator and the current holder of the Darksaber, had become the leader of a terrorist organization known as Death Watch. These Mandalorians rejected the pacifist ideals of the new Mandalorians and sought to restore the warrior culture of their ancestors. For them, the Darksaber wasn't just a weapon, it was a reminder of what Mandalore had been and what it could be again. Pre-Vizsla wore the Darksaber on his back when he donned his armor, a constant reminder to both allies and enemies of his legitimacy as a leader of the old ways. He was skilled with the weapon, having trained with it since childhood, and he used it to deadly effect against anyone who stood in Death Watch's way. The Clone Wars brought new challenges and opportunities for Death Watch and their leader. When Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi discovered their hidden base, Pre-Vizsla engaged him in single combat, wielding the Darksaber against Kenobi's blue lightsaber. The duel was a spectacular display of skill versus tradition, with Vizsla boasting that many Jedi had died upon the Darksaber's blade and that Kenobi would soon join them. Despite his skill and the power of his ancestral weapon, Pre-Vizsla was unable to defeat the experienced Jedi Master. Kenobi escaped with Duchess Satine, leaving Vizsla to plot his next move, but this defeat didn't diminish his determination. If anything, it strengthened his resolve to restore Mandalore to its former glory. The Darksaber continued to serve Pre-Vizsla well throughout the Clone Wars. When Death Watch made camp on the frozen world of Karlak, Vizsla used the weapon in a brutal display of power, attempting to execute a local chieftain for defying him. When Padawan Ahsoka Tano revealed herself and tried to defend the innocent, Vizsla saw it as an opportunity to add another Jedi to the Darksaber's tally. Though Tano ultimately escaped, the encounter demonstrated both the weapon's lethality and Vizsla's willingness to use it against anyone, even children. But it was Pre-Vizsla's alliance with the Sith Lord Maul that would ultimately seal his fate. Desperate to overthrow Duchess Satine's government, Vizsla agreed to work with Maul and his Shadow Collective. Together, they orchestrated a series of attacks on Mandalore that were designed to make the pacifist government look weak and ineffective. The plan worked perfectly. Death Watch positioned themselves as the heroes who could protect Mandalore from the Shadow Collective's attacks, not revealing that they were working together. The Mandalorian people, desperate for security, welcomed Death Watch as liberators. Pre-Vizsla had finally achieved his goal of overthrowing the new Mandalorians and claiming control of Mandalore. But Maul had his own agenda. Once their shared goal was achieved, the Sith Lord revealed his true intentions. He challenged Pre-Vizsla for leadership of Death Watch and control of Mandalore, invoking the ancient Mandalorian tradition of trial by combat. Vizsla, confident in his skills and the power of the Darksaber, accepted the challenge. The duel between Pre-Vizsla and Maul was a clash of ideologies as much as it was a fight between warriors. Vizsla represented the old Mandalorian ways, fighting with the Darksaber and all the weapons at his disposal: his jetpack, his flamethrower, his grappling cable. He was a warrior trained from birth in the traditions of his people, wielding a weapon that had been in his family for generations. Maul, on the other hand, was pure, focused lethality. He fought with the efficient brutality of a Sith Lord, using the Force and his dual-bladed lightsaber to counter every one of Vizsla's attacks. Despite putting up an impressive fight, Pre-Vizsla was ultimately disarmed and defeated. In a moment that shocked the watching Death Watch warriors, Maul picked up the fallen Darksaber and used it to execute Pre-Vizsla, claiming both the weapon and leadership of Death Watch. This moment was crucial to understanding the Darksaber's nature. While the weapon had always been associated with Mandalorian leadership, Maul's victory proved that the ancient customs were more important than blood or species. He had won the Darksaber in fair combat, according to Mandalorian law, making his claim legitimate whether the Mandalorians liked it or not. But not everyone accepted Maul's rule. Bo-Katan Kryze, Pre-Vizsla's lieutenant and sister to the late Duchess Satine, refused to follow a non-Mandalorian leader despite the legitimacy of his claim. This split Death Watch down the middle, with some accepting Maul's leadership and others following Bo-Katan in exile. Under Maul's control, the Darksaber became something different. Where it had once been a symbol of Mandalorian heritage and tradition, it now represented the raw power and ambition of a Sith Lord. Maul used the weapon with cold efficiency, employing it to eliminate threats and consolidate his power over Mandalore. When Maul lured Obi-Wan Kenobi back to Mandalore as part of his revenge scheme, he used the Darksaber to kill Duchess Satine right in front of the Jedi Master. This wasn't just murder, it was a deliberate act of psychological warfare designed to cause Kenobi maximum pain. The weapon that had been created by a Jedi was now being used to destroy everything Kenobi cared about. But Maul's triumph was short-lived. His former master, Darth Sidious, arrived on Mandalore to deal with his wayward apprentice. The Emperor had no intention of allowing Maul to build his own power base, and he came with the full intention of eliminating the threat. The confrontation between Sidious and Maul was a battle between master and apprentice, between the old Sith Order and the new. Maul and his brother Savage Opress fought desperately against the Emperor, with Maul wielding both his own red lightsaber and the Darksaber in a spectacular display of dual-weapon combat. But they were no match for Sidious. The Emperor killed Savage and defeated Maul, tossing aside the Darksaber as he subdued his former apprentice with Force lightning. For the first time in centuries, the Darksaber was left abandoned, its wielder captured and taken away to prison. The weapon didn't remain masterless for long. Prime Minister Almec and Maul's Mandalorian super commandos recovered the Darksaber from the wreckage of the battle, keeping it safe until their leader could reclaim it. When Maul was eventually freed from the Spire prison, the Darksaber was returned to him, and he continued to use it in his ongoing conflicts throughout the galaxy. Maul's time with the Darksaber was marked by constant warfare. He used it against General Grievous's forces when the Separatist droid army attacked Zanbar, fighting the cyborg general in single combat while his base was under siege. He wielded it during raids and battles across the galaxy, from Ord Mantell to Vizsla Keep 09, each conflict adding to the weapon's already bloody history. The final chapter of Maul's ownership came during the Second Battle of Dathomir, when he returned to his homeworld to help Mother Talzin regain her physical form, once again confronted by Sidious and his forces. Maul fought valiantly with the Darksaber, but he was ultimately forced to flee as Talzin sacrificed herself to save him. With Maul's defeat and exile, the Darksaber was once again left behind, hidden away in the Night Sister lair on Dathomir, where it would remain for years. The weapon that had shaped the destiny of Mandalore was now lost in the ruins of a dead world, waiting for someone worthy to claim it. That someone turned out to be Sabine Wren, a young Mandalorian artist and explosives expert who had joined the rebel cause. During a mission to Dathomir, Sabine was possessed by a Night Sister spirit and used the Darksaber against her friend Ezra Bridger. After the spirits were defeated and the altar destroyed, Sabine took the weapon with her, though she was initially reluctant to wield it herself. Sabine's relationship with the Darksaber was complicated by her past. She had once been an Imperial cadet who had created weapons that were used against her own people. The guilt and shame she felt made her believe she was unworthy of wielding such a significant symbol of Mandalorian heritage. It was Fen Rao, a former Mandalorian protector, who convinced Sabine to embrace her destiny. He explained the weapon's history and significance, helping her understand that the Darksaber wasn't just a weapon. It was a tool that could unite the Mandalorian clans and give them the strength to fight back against the Empire. Under the tutelage of Jedi Knight Kanan Jarrus, Sabine began training with the Darksaber. The weapon seemed to fight against her at first, feeling heavy and unwieldy in her hands. Kanan explained that the Darksaber had a unique property. It became heavier or lighter depending on the wielder's emotional state and their connection to the weapon. The training process was as much about emotional healing as it was about combat technique. Through sparring with Kanan and confronting her past, Sabine was able to work through her guilt and accept that she was worthy of wielding the Darksaber. The moment she stopped fighting against the weapon and embraced her heritage, it became light as a feather in her hands. Sabine's first real test came when she returned to her homeworld of Crownest to seek her family's support for the rebellion. Her mother, Ursa Wren, initially disputed Sabine's claim to the weapon since she hadn't won it in single combat according to Mandalorian tradition. But when Imperial Viceroy Gar Saxon arrived with the intention of destroying Clan Wren, Sabine had the chance to prove herself. The duel between Sabine and Saxon was a battle for the soul of Mandalore. Saxon represented the Empire's control over the Mandalorian people, while Sabine fought for freedom and the restoration of Mandalorian independence. Though Saxon was larger and more experienced, Sabine's training and determination allowed her to wound him and reclaim the Darksaber, establishing her legitimacy as its wielder. With the Darksaber in her possession, Sabine set about the task of uniting the Mandalorian clans against the Empire. She led missions to rescue fellow Mandalorians from Imperial custody and destroy the weapons she had once created. Throughout these adventures, the Darksaber served as both a practical weapon and a symbol of hope for the Mandalorian people. But Sabine ultimately recognized that she wasn't meant to rule Mandalore. When she encountered Bo-Katan Kryze, the former Death Watch lieutenant who had opposed Maul's rule, Sabine made a decision that would change the course of Mandalorian history. She offered the Darksaber to Bo-Katan, believing that the older woman was better suited to lead their people. Bo-Katan initially refused the offer, feeling unworthy after her failures during the Clone Wars, but Sabine persisted, and with the support of other Mandalorian clans, Bo-Katan finally accepted the Darksaber and the responsibility that came with it. For the first time since Pre Vizsla's death, the weapon was in the hands of someone who had the respect and support of the Mandalorian people. Bo-Katan's second reign as the wielder of the Darksaber was tragically short-lived. The Empire, sensing the growing threat of a united Mandalore, launched what would become known as the Great Purge of Mandalore. This wasn't just a military campaign, it was an attempt at genocide, designed to wipe out Mandalorian culture once and for all. The Night of 1,000 Tears saw most of Mandalore's forces defeated and scattered across the galaxy. Faced with the complete destruction of her people, Bo-Katan made the most difficult decision of her life. She surrendered the Darksaber to Moff Gideon, hoping that this act of submission would convince the Empire to end the slaughter. But the Empire betrayed her trust. Despite her surrender of the most sacred symbol of Mandalorian leadership, the Great Purge continued. Mandalorians were hunted down and killed wherever they were found, their armor taken as trophies, their children scattered to the winds. Bo-Katan fled Mandalore, but the guilt of her decision haunted her for years to come. For decades after the Great Purge, Moff Gideon kept the Darksaber as both a trophy and a tool of control. He understood its significance to the Mandalorian people and used it to remind them of their defeat. The weapon that had once been a symbol of Mandalorian strength and independence had become a symbol of their subjugation. Gideon wasn't just collecting the weapon as a curiosity. He had his own plans for the Darksaber and the power it represented. By the time of the New Republic, he was using it as part of his experiments with cloning and Force-sensitive subjects, seeking to create a new kind of imperial power that combined technology, the Force, and Mandalorian symbolism. The Darksaber's liberation came from an unexpected source. Din Djarin, a Mandalorian foundling who had been raised by the Children of the Watch, a strict Orthodox sect that followed the old ways. When Djarin's quest to return the Force-sensitive child Grogu to the Jedi brought him into conflict with Gideon, he had no idea that he was about to become part of the Darksaber's legend. During their confrontation aboard Gideon's cruiser, Djarin defeated the Moff in single combat, unknowingly winning the Darksaber according to ancient Mandalorian law. When Bo-Katan arrived to help with the rescue, Djarin tried to simply hand her the weapon, not understanding its significance or the customs surrounding it. But Bo-Katan refused to accept the Darksaber as a gift. She had learned from her previous mistakes and understood that accepting the weapon without earning it would make her claim illegitimate in the eyes of many Mandalorians. The very customs that had allowed Maul to claim leadership of Death Watch now prevented her from simply taking back what she had once wielded. This created a complicated situation that highlighted the complexity of Mandalorian culture. Djarin had legitimately won the Darksaber but had no desire to rule Mandalore. Bo-Katan wanted to reclaim her position as leader but couldn't do so without violating the traditions that gave the Darksaber its power. It was a perfect example of how symbols and customs can sometimes create problems even when everyone involved has good intentions. Djarin's time as the unwitting owner of the Darksaber was marked by difficulty and conflict. The weapon seemed to fight against him, feeling heavy and unwieldy in his hands. The armorer of his covert explained that this was because he was fighting against the Darksaber rather than working with it, but also warned him of the weapon's supposed curse. According to the beliefs of the Children of the Watch, the Darksaber carried a terrible curse that would bring destruction to Mandalore if it was acquired outside of honorable combat. They pointed to the Great Purge as evidence of this curse, suggesting that Bo-Katan's acceptance of the weapon as a gift had doomed their people. Whether or not one believes in the curse, there's no denying that the Darksaber's history is filled with tragedy and conflict. Every person who has wielded it has faced tremendous challenges, and many have met violent ends. Pre-Vizsla was executed by Maul. Maul was defeated and imprisoned by Sidious. Saxon was killed by Ursa Wren, and Bo-Katan lost everything during the Great Purge. Despite these ominous portents, Djarin continued to carry the Darksaber, using it in his work as a bounty hunter and in battles against Imperial remnants. His lack of training with the weapon led to several embarrassing incidents, including accidentally cutting his own leg during a fight, but he gradually began to understand its unique properties. The resolution of the Darksaber's ownership came through a creative interpretation of Mandalorian law. When Djarin was captured while exploring the ruins of Mandalore, Bo-Katan rescued him and defeated his captor while wielding the Darksaber. Djarin later argued that since Bo-Katan had defeated the enemy who had defeated him, she had effectively won the weapon in combat. This interpretation was accepted by the assembled Mandalorian forces, finally giving Bo-Katan the legitimate claim she needed to reclaim her position as leader. It was a solution that honored both the letter and spirit of Mandalorian law, while allowing the weapon to return to someone who had the knowledge and desire to wield it properly. But the Darksaber's story didn't end with Bo-Katan's reclamation of it. During the final battle to retake Mandalore from Moff Gideon's forces, the weapon met its apparent end. In a climactic duel between Bo-Katan and Gideon, the Moff's strength-enhancing armor allowed him to crush the Darksaber's hilt while she held it, destroying the weapon that had shaped Mandalorian history for over 1,000 years. The destruction of the Darksaber marks the end of an era in Mandalorian culture. For more than a millennium, the weapon had served as the ultimate symbol of legitimate rule over Mandalore. It had survived the fall of the Old Republic, the Clone Wars, the rise and fall of the Empire, and countless conflicts in between. But in the end, it was destroyed not by another lightsaber or the Force, but by the crude strength of Imperial technology. Some might see the Darksaber's destruction as a tragedy, the loss of an irreplaceable piece of Mandalorian heritage. Others might view it as a liberation, freeing the Mandalorian people from dependence on a single symbol and allowing them to forge their own destiny without being bound by ancient customs and supposed curses. What's certain is that the Darksaber's legacy will long outlive the weapon itself. For over 1,000 years, it shaped the destiny of one of the galaxy's most influential cultures. It was wielded by Jedi and Sith, heroes and villains, liberators and tyrants. It was stolen from the Jedi Temple, passed down through generations, lost and found, won and lost again in countless duels and battles. The Darksaber represented the best and worst of Mandalorian culture, their honor and their violence, their unity and their fractiousness, their strength and their vulnerability. It was a weapon that could unite the clans or divide them, depending on who wielded it and how they chose to use its power. Perhaps most importantly, the Darksaber's story shows us that symbols are only as powerful as the people who believe in them. The weapon itself was just Beskar and crystal and energy, but the meaning that the Mandalorian people invested in it made it something far greater. It became a repository for their hopes and fears, their pride and their shame, their dreams of what Mandalore could be. In the end, the true power of the Darksaber wasn't in its ability to cut through armor or deflect blaster bolts. It was in its ability to inspire people to fight for something greater than themselves, to unite fractious clans under a common cause, and to preserve the memory of what Mandalore had been while working toward what it could become. The Darksaber is gone, but its legacy lives on in the Mandalorian people, who are rebuilding their world and their culture. They no longer need an ancient weapon to tell them who they are or who should lead them. They have learned that true strength comes not from the symbols we carry, but from the choices we make and the values we live by. And perhaps that's the most fitting end to the Darksaber's story, not with the weapon being passed down to another generation, but with the Mandalorian people finally freeing themselves from dependence on ancient symbols and learning to forge their own path among the stars. The Darksaber may be broken, but the spirit it represented, the unbreakable will of the Mandalorian people, endures.